Alright, let's take a look at different types of separation techniques. Separation techniques are used on mixtures. These are not techniques that can be used to separate elements within a compound. So let's look back at a couple types of mixtures we've talked about. We've talked about heterogeneous. A couple of examples here would be Chex Mix and salad. We've also talked about homogeneous. A couple of examples here would be salt water and Kool-Aid. The first technique we're going to look at is magnetism. This is simply using a magnet to separate magnetic materials from non-magnetic materials. So there's a magnet attracting some magnetic materials. This type of separation technique is used in recycling centers. That's why when you stick your recycling bin out by the curb, you can just stick everything in it. They dump it in a truck, they send it through a conveyor belt, and magnetism is one of the ways that they remove the magnetic metals from the big heap of recycling. Another method of separating mixtures is called decanting. If you've ever heard of a decanter, usually that's spoken about when talked about wine or some other kind of drink. It basically means to pour. It's a technique used to separate liquids or a liquid from a solid by pouring off the top liquid layer. So if you've got oil and water, for example, and you wanted to separate them from one another, you would carefully pour off one layer, and that would be an example of decanting. Or in this class, we're going to use it to separate a liquid from a solid by very carefully pouring off as much of the liquid as we can get off of the solid at a time, doing it several times to make sure we get all the liquid off. Filtration is another technique. This is one I'm sure you are familiar with. It's the process that separates a solid from a liquid in a heterogeneous mixture by use of a filter. So this is where you can definitely tell I've got a solid floating around in my liquid or down at the bottom of the container that my liquid is in, and decanting's not going to cut it. So I'm going to pour this through a filter to catch the solid and allow the liquid to go through. This is used anytime you cook pasta, if you make coffee, and then in this class we're going to have a setup similar to what you see here, where you've got a funnel with some filter paper that's going to catch the solid and allow the liquid to pour through to the bottom, and we call that liquid the filtrate. Another technique is called distillation. This one's a little bit more involved, or can be. This is a process used to separate a mixture based on the boiling points of the substances in the mixture. So this is generally a mixture of liquids, could be several liquids. In this class we're mainly going to take a look at simple distillation, where you make a solution. In this case we've got sugar and water to make a sugar solution, where water is our solvent and sugar is our solute. And then once we've got the solution, we can heat it, and then the water evaporates and we're left with the sugar again. And since water evaporates at a much lower temperature than sugar, we're able to boil it all off and be left with our sugar without ending up with a mess. This here is an example of a fractioning column. This is something that is used in chemistry labs to help separate mixtures of liquids by boiling point, and then it recondenses it so that it becomes a liquid again. This is a method used for petroleum, separating different types of the gasoline and the oil and all of that business. You can see the different boiling points for different parts of the petroleum once it comes out of the ground, separate it into different gases and gasoline and other things. And the last type of separation technique is called chromatography. You should have done some chromatography in biology last year using leaves. Maybe even did it with markers. It's a separation technique of separating mixtures using a solid support plus a liquid. So in every kind of chromatography, a mixture separates because some of its components stick better to the solid, so they stay behind. These components have a strong affinity or attraction for the solid. Other parts of the mixture dissolve in the solution that wicks into or across the solid. So here's some examples of some marker chromatography. It could have been a black, maybe a brown marker dotted at the bottom, towards the bottom of these pieces of chromatography paper, and then water was allowed to seep up through the paper and carry the different colors of ink to different levels depending on how strong the attraction between the ink and the paper was. This can also be used to separate small molecules and large molecules because the small molecules will move easier with the solvent than the large ones. And polar and non-polar molecules, because polar molecules are going to move with the solvent and non-polar molecules are not, because they will not dissolve as easily. So there's a look at different types of separation techniques.